joke inspired by Professor Floridi's presentation, but also a joke that I think sums up the ethos and purpose of the Adapt Centre. An economist, an engineer, a lawyer and a philosopher are stranded on a desert island. The engineer goes and finds trees and vines and lashes together a raft to try and escape. The lawyer looks at the raft and refuses to sign off on it. But the engineer goes out to escape the island on his raft with no idea of whether he will actually get to a destination. But he's built a raft. The lawyer goes down to the water's edge and mumbles strange incantations in Latin. A shark appears. The lawyer grabs the shark and sails off on the back of the shark, shouting, "Professional consideration." The economist sits in the sun and says, "Assume a rescue vessel." The philosopher sits in the sun and decides to ponder the concept of what a rescue is and what exactly he was being rescued from. And they're the different perspectives that we need to try and juggle and align when we start thinking about information in the modern age, particularly in the context of the right to be forgotten, but also other rights and other issues. This is an example of the problem we have. There's an error, data quality problem here. I've transposed the captions. The one on the left is actually from Samsung's Smart TV User Manual. The one on the right is from 1984. But the day that was tweeted as a juxtaposition of text was quite possibly the worst day to be working for Samsung's marketing department, when it is possible for you to confuse what the smart TV does with what George Orwell predicted. And this is the challenge we have, that the nightmare things that people were considering 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago are technically capable and technically possible today. And the juggling act we have and the balancing act we need to find as technologists, as business innovators, as researchers, is how to implement the shiny toys safely in a way that doesn't cause us to have nightmare outcomes. An example of this from a data perspective, again, the irony here of using data about people searching on Google for ad blocking software. So those people have profiles now with Google showing that they're interested in ad blocking. But if you notice, there was very little activity of people searching for ad blocking as a term until the end of 2012, beginning of 2013. What happened in that period was the advertising industry internationally said, yeah, that do not track thing we said we were going to honor in web browsers, we've changed our minds, that will kill our business model. Once they said that, people started looking for software to take control of the situation. And then it starts to trail off in 2015. Can anyone suggest why, in 2015, fewer people were searching for ad blocking software? Well, a number of computer manufacturers, Apple in particular, started enabling it by default in their browsers, started enabling it by default in their technology. So people didn't have to look for it themselves quite so hard. So in that context, this is a model based on it's a ninebox model developed by Riskbased in the University of Amsterdam. It originates from, there's the punchline additional build. We've extended it in Castlebridge Associates to include the customer perspective. But what this model describes is the interplay in organizations, too many builds, an interplay in organizations between business, information, and technology verticals at the strategic, tactical, and operational level. And this model came about from a study of why software projects and information change management projects in organizations fail. And the reason that they tended to fail was people didn't think about the information vertical in organizations. They were thinking about technology versus business, but not necessarily considering what the information that defined the organization, that defined the organization's relationship with its customers meant, and sort of things you needed to do in there, like defining what a customer is. I've run single view of customer projects for a number of years, and the constant refrain is, if you get 15 people in a room and ask them to define what a customer is, be expected to get 20 definitions. Maybe we need a philosopher. But when we start bringing in the customer perspective, to bring in the idea of quality, customers don't care about the business model, the information model, or the technology model. They care about this outcome. What's happening to them? Are they getting what they want from it? And the information outcome. What sort of trail are they leaving behind? What's happening to their data? Is there something unexpected going to happen? And the expectation that they have of that is how they perceive the quality of what's going on. So the spike in ad blocking, the advertising industry said all that stuff we said we were going to respect from an information and technology perspective, it doesn't suit our business model, and the customers responded by looking for software to block the adverts. So if you're uncertain about whether privacy is a quality characteristic of information, Condescending Wonka has a question for you. It's also worth pointing out that there is a global legislative trend, and this slide is slightly out of date. There's a researcher called, I can't remember his first name, Greenleaf, who does an ongoing review. I think he's in the University of Oxford. I think he's in Oxford. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he does an ongoing review of data privacy legislation worldwide. And currently there's about 110 or 111 jurisdictions that have at a state or federal level an overarching data privacy law. The most recent that I can remember is Madagascar. If you can get some way you can do a knowledge sharing with Madagascar, Minister, I volunteer. For the country, I will volunteer. But many of these regulations are based on, and legislation is based on European frameworks, and the underlying principles within the European frameworks. And that's where principles become really important, because when you take it out of legislation and legislative structures and start focusing on principles, then we're moving more into the philosophical, conceptual frame. And that's where things get very interesting. This is the one-slide summary of the General Data Protection Regulation. This is the most requested slide from my Law Society students, summarising 209 pages in one slide in terms of the high-level concepts, and we can then drill down into that. One of the key things that is happening with the General Data Protection Regulation is this move towards a risk-based model. And when you move towards a risk-based model, then you're into concepts. You're away from defined prescriptive things, and you're into the concepts of what is risk. What is meaningful? What's a tangible risk? What's a material risk? What are the underlying principles we are trying to uphold in what we're doing with our processing of information? And how are we implementing governance structures to make sure that we're managing those risks so we avoid the nasty penalties? And one-stop shop is a dotted line, because we'll have to see how that pans out in practice. But that's the basic one-slide summary. The key problem you have when you're in a risk-based world is the idea of risk appetite. Are you the Augustus Gloop of the information world? Are you trying to gobble everything in sight? Or are you taking a more refined approach? Are you more like Charlie Bucket, who inherits the chocolate factory? Please bear that one in mind. The character in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory who thinks about other people and puts them first, who thinks about their needs, their wants, and their desires, gets the factory and the glass elevator and all that comes with it. Augustus Gloop winds up being sucked up into a tube. Of course, ethics comes into this. Ethics from Ethics Indian Schmindians. This is a line from someone I worked with a few years ago when I raised the question of ethics in a context. But the European Data Protection Supervisor has published an opinion on ethics, talking with the fundamental rights to privacy, which echoes the Charter of Fundamental Rights, talking about the right to privacy, which is Article 7, and the Court of Justice is already ruling on that, talking about the protection of personal data, which is Article 8 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, already ruling on that from the Court of Justice. But the really, really important one, human dignity, Article 1 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, the one that is the absolute, the one that is harder to trade off against other things. And the preservation of human dignity is something we need to focus on as a concept in how we're processing data, how we're thinking about what we're doing with information. Of course, this is taken from the NADPS paper. One problem I had with that as someone who is colourblind is that brown on grey just doesn't work. So to improve my dignity and the dignity of other colourblind people, I've recoloured the slide. And what we're talking about doing, what the European Data Protection Supervisor is proposing here is that we make controllers accountable. Accountable for what? Well, that overall structure of business, information, technology at the strategic, operational and tactical level of an organisation. Being focused on the future rules and enforcement, not staring in the rearview mirror for what worked last month, but thinking about what's coming next and how we can define principles-based regulation, be it in a legislative frame or in terms of standards and guidelines, which empowers individuals, which we can then innovate with. Designing systems, designing solutions, designing ways of working with information that supports human dignity and approaches things in an ethical way. Of course, that's a challenge because technology is ethically neutral. And this is from Whitepaper we produced on information ethical frameworks for information management. And the key challenge here is that the human factors. Humans make ethical choices. Algorithms don't. Algorithms make tightly constrained logical choices. But the human factors piece, the soft, squidgy bit about what feels right, what smells right, is a key factor. The white paper is available on the website. I'll send, or a link can be sent out for anyone wants to read that in a bit more detail. Of course, when we start thinking about ethical rules, you can't beat the Germans for ethical rules. If you're going to go ethics, you've got to go straight to Kant. The first two formulations, act only the maximum which you can at the same time, will it become universal law? Great. So if you've nothing to fear, if you've nothing to hide, you've nothing to fear from surveillance. Lovely. Take down your curtains, walk naked on the street. Same principle applies. Treat people as an end, not simply as the means. So if you're not paying for it, you're the product. Is in violation of that principle. Key point here is that as we implement tools and technologies and ways of using data, ways of gathering data, these fundamental principles become very important when we start thinking about things like privacy by design. How is what we're designing going to help make things better? Are we using the individual and the data we're gathering about an individual as the basis of our business model? And are we farming the people to gather the data that generates our revenues? And this is a conflict that exists in organizations in any area of regulatory compliance or any area of industry conflicting with society. This cultural integration between the competitive values of commerce and the moral values that we want organizations to follow. You look at something like the environmental movement. For many years, it was perfectly acceptable for companies to be dumping toxic waste and burying toxic waste in landfill. Then we discovered that was a bad thing to do. However, in Flint, Michigan, they're still paying the price for that with massive amounts of lead from the fallout from the automotive industry, perhaps. One of the challenges we then have when we start thinking about the ethics and the competitive values is quantified self, or as I've termed it, the quantified surf. I did a presentation for the Science Gallery a few months ago where we discussed the quantified surf. But if you look at life logging, and you've got a Fitbit, put your hand up, wave your hand around, congratulations, you just earned yourself 3 more steps. Fitbit had an interesting problem where hackers had gained access to the email addresses of Fitbit users, Fitbit subscribers, and they were submitting requests for warranty replacement Fitbit devices. Fitbit had absolutely no controls over the sending out of replacement devices. They would just ship them to whatever address they were asked to send them to. Because the device is not Fitbit's business model. It's the data that they gather about the users is their business model. Which is why Fitbit is moving into the insurance industry in the US. The moment in partnership with health insurance companies, where employers in the US are giving their staff Fitbits to get a discount on the company healthcare plan. Okay. But again, the individual is the means, not the end. Their use of the device they're being sent out, is the means to gather the data is the business model. So, if you've measured out your life in coffee spoons, anyone recognize where this quote comes from? Proof Rock. Thank you. We've got someone from a literature background. Or leaving cert. But again, we're dealing with fundamental concepts here of identity, of the conceptual design of society. And this is something that literature has struggled with for years. This is what literature does. It defines these concepts. It gives us an opportunity to explore them. Another quote from Prufrock is directly related to the right to be forgotten. The desire to be able to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. The ability to reinvent yourself depending on the stage of life you're at. A friend of mine, they have a sister-in-law who is a young graduate from a master's in law who was somewhat concerned that she couldn't get an interview for any sort of internship or any sort of placement until I showed her Facebook profile. And all the photographs in her publicly accessible and publicly searchable Facebook profile. That was why she wasn't being hired. No one was going to say that. No one was going to hire someone whose profile picture was her sitting in a stolen shopping trolley in New Jersey on her junior year abroad, or J1. Those sorts of footprints we leave are the things we want to maybe distance ourselves from. We want them to sediment down, and that's the challenge we have. And it's one of the things that we need to balance from a technology perspective when we start looking at this framework of business, information and technology at the strategic, tactical and operational layer. The customer's perspective of what they want to do, whether they want to be the means, not the end, whether they accept that they'll get their Fitbit replaced for free because Fitbit want their data, or whether they want to have some other interaction, some other way of controlling that interaction with their data and the use of that data. We have to then look at the framework of the organisation in terms of how it views ethics, and the framework of society in terms of how society views ethics. And the interplay between these comes about in terms of regulation in the law, feeds in at the strategic level, and that drives, we've got too many builds, that drives across the organisation, from the business, how we view information, how we implement technology strategies to comply with regulation and law. Regulation and law, society saying, we'd rather you didn't run amok in this way. We'd rather you have some level of constraint on your actions. But of course, organisations want to influence legislation, so they will lobby. And the European Data Protection Regulation, 4,000 specific individual amendments proposed by lobbyists, probably the most heavily lobbied piece of legislation in the history of the European Union, because organisations wanted to influence the legal framework that society were putting in place. Society can also influence organisations through standards and codes of practice and codes of conduct. So whenever you see a public consultation on something, for example, a legislative consultation, that's a wonderful opportunity for you to have your voice in society. So the electronic health record public consultation the Department of Health are running at the moment, the HSE are running, brilliant opportunity for you to have your say about how far you would want things to go, what your concerns are in relation to how the business model, the information model and technology model for implementing those things are being put into place. The organisational ethical framework pushes out into society through the definition of standards as well. Standard models, standard ways of working. And how we influence those is, as customers, dealing with the operational end, giving feedback about whether the conduct of the organisation meets our expectation. Customer complaint lines are a wonderful source of information about what goes on in an organisation. And there was an instance last year of an organisation the Information Commissioner's Office had prosecuted for breaches of the Data Protection Act in terms of unsolicited marketing. And on the day that they were being prosecuted, they were swearing blind to the ICO that they were complying with the undertakings they've been asked to give. But if you look at their Twitter profile, there were thousands of complaints on Twitter to the organisation about unsolicited marketing. The customer complained to the operational level about how information was being managed and exploited, but not necessarily moving up the organisation in terms of the management structures, the governance frameworks. Of course, the organisation can influence society through customer education, telling people what you're going to do with their data, fair processing notices, privacy by design, going out and talking to the customer about what might happen with a product or with a service, or how you want to bring about a benefit. So there might be a wonderful benefit in Fitbit being the primary health insurer of choice, but maybe they have to convince us of that in order to justify giving us wonderful technology for free. Or maybe we buy it for the first instance, but then if we break it, they'll give it to us for free, because the data is actually what's important to them. And of course, we cannot end a presentation that references T.S. Eliot, but also referencing W.B. Yeats. This is the Leaving Cert review. Because we are in an information age, because of the technical capabilities we have, everything's changed utterly. But the fundamental principles we need to consider are actually relatively ancient, relatively basic, and are transparently visible through the things we've written in the past, going back to discussions of privacy in the writings of St. Augustine. You can go back to discussions of the interplay between private rights and the rights of the state, going back to the writings of Confucius. The fundamentals debate is age-old, but the capability of getting it wrong is, the impact of getting it wrong now is significantly greater. Okay, thank you.